Our keynote speaker is Father Benedict Jung. He's a Jesuit, and he at the Faculty of Social Science. He's an associate lecturer at the Faculty of Social Science here at the Gregorian, a member of the Society of Jesus. His academic work engages key questions at the intersection of social theory, religion, and contemporary global issues. His research focuses on the relationship between religion and society, with particular attention to ethical, intercultural, and interdisciplinary perspectives. He is involved in teaching and mentoring students in the field of social science within an international academic environment. Okay, the floor is yours, Father Benedict.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the kind introduction, Sister Miriam. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to share this time with you who are committed to safeguarding intercultural dialogue and the protection of human dignity. I hope that today's reflection on Confucian perspectives will contribute to our common learning and open a fruitful conversation amongst us. I think that safeguarding is often and generally understood through policies, training, reporting procedures, and risk management. Yet this view seems to be a bit incomplete because safeguarding also concerns relationships and human dignity. Institutions must recognize vulnerable persons, receive disclosures honestly, and respond before harm becomes normalized or concealed. Safeguarding is therefore a moral and relational practice that places vulnerable persons above institutional reputation. Culture also shapes how safeguarding is understood. While many contemporary frameworks emerged from Western legal traditions, East Asian contexts often emphasize family obligations, hierarchy, relationships, and social harmony. Confucian ethics can support safeguarding through relational responsibility, moral cultivation, social order, and care. However, harmony, loyalty, and respect for authority must be critically examined because they may either strengthen protection or discourse, disclosure, and accountability. Safeguarding has both defensive and enabling dimensions. Defensive safety protects people from abuse and exploitation, while enabling safety creates conditions for participation, freedom, and development. Its foundation is the inviolable dignity of every child, survivor, patient, and vulnerable adult. In today's presentation, I would like to argue that safeguarding is not only institutional compliance, but also a moral, relational, and intercultural practice. I will examine how Confucian philosophy can contribute to safeguarding while identifying limitations that require correction and our attention. I will begin by presenting 4 fundamental concepts of Confucian philosophy. The selection of the 4 concepts are influenced by my upbringing in the Confucian culture in Korea, which make me believe that they are essential to any discussion of safeguarding. The second part presents a SWOT analysis of Confucian approaches to safeguarding. Building on this analysis, the third part proposes several intercultural communication mechanisms designed to support contextually response safeguarding while avoiding the limitations of one-size-fits-all approach. The presentation concludes by synthesizing the main findings and implications. Confucianism as relational ethics. A major tenet of Confucian philosophy is that persons are constituted through overlapping relationships rather than existing as isolated individuals. As one Korean scholar explains, this world is not a world of my existence alone, but one in which you, as the other, also coexist. Recognizing the other and seeking mutual flourishing, therefore, contributes to the creation of a human culture. A closely related understanding of human flourishing appears in Pope Leo XIV's encyclical Magnificat Humanitas. The quality of a civilization is measured not by the power of its means, but by the care it is able to offer, by its ability to recognize the other as a face, not merely as a function. The ability to care for one another is a fundamental dimension of our humanity, one that is learned and mastered through lived experience. Read together, these perspectives suggest that a humane civilization depends on relational recognition. The other must be encountered not as an instrument or a social function, but as a person whose flourishing is bound up with one's own. Confucian ethics understands the proper life for human beings as one formed within relationships rather than in isolation. This makes it especially relevant to safeguarding, since harm often occurs within families and communities and therefore calls for relational responsibility. Moral identity is thus grounded in the quality of relationships, while moral excellence extends beyond family loyalty to sympathetic concern for all people and the pursuit of complete goodness. From this perspective, safeguarding becomes a shared relational obligation. Individuals and organizations must create environment in which trust is sustained, dignity and vulnerability are respected, and the responsibility for protection is collectively assumed. Confucianism is therefore best understood not merely as a system of rules of ethics, but as a tradition of moral formation rooted in relationships. Human beings do not become ethical in isolation. Confucian ethics asks not only what action is right, but also what kind of person should I become, and how should I live responsibly with others. This approach connects personal character, social responsibility, and institutional culture. Let me present 4 Confucian concepts that might provide a useful framework for understanding this ethical vision. First, Ren, which can be translated as humaneness and benevolence. Ren is widely recognized as a fundamental concept in Confucian ethics and is commonly translated as humaneness, benevolence, or human concern. Rather than being a single virtue, Ren is a pervasive moral disposition that shapes interpersonal relationships and social behavior. Confucian character formation can be described as comprising humaneness, righteousness, propriety, knowledge, integrity, reflecting the relational nature of this ethical tradition. Because these virtues foster compassion, Ren is particularly relevant to safeguarding as an expression of concern for those most at risk. Confucian thought also emphasizes collective conscientiousness. People understand ethical progress as directed toward the welfare of the society and the collective, highlighting the social dimension of moral responsibility. Effective safeguarding similarly requires communities to assume shared responsibility for preventing harms. Within Confucian moral philosophy, Allison identifies universal love as an important ethical consideration and describe reciprocity as a central principle. Reciprocity requires individuals to consider how their actions affect others. Together, universal love and reciprocity support the safeguarding principle that every person is entitled to protection and respect for their rights and dignity. Safeguarding can therefore be understood as an expression of care and collective moral responsibility. Li, appropriate conduct and social order. While Ren focuses on the care for others, Li focuses on the societal expectations about what behavior is appropriate. Confucianism does not sharply separate character from behavior, because genuine moral development is expected to become visible in action in our daily lives. Virtues are not merely inner qualities or good intentions. They are formed through repeated practice and expressed in the way a person treats others, fulfills responsibilities, and responds to particular situations. Consistent moral conduct, therefore, both reveals and further shapes a person's character. A scholar Lai says that moral norms are connected with broader social understanding of ethical life rather than existing as isolated rules detached from experience. He also considers the practical implications of ethical values for regular social interactions. As he notes, moral values develop their significance through their practical manifestation. Practical manifestations. Hence, if ethical values are to be of practical significance in shaping people's conduct, they must be expressed in observed actions. In the case of safeguarding, this entails respectful communication, openness, and responsible actions. Without the practical manifestation of safeguarding values, they become like empty symbols, which at best are statements of wishful thinking. That is, they do not have any meaningful or practical influence on the culture of an organization. This is an indication of the enduring relevance of moral values, which, for safeguarding, points to the necessity of developing ethical cultures within the constant practical expression of ethical values in an organization. For safeguarding to be effective, moral values need to be accompanied by the forms of conduct that are expressive of these values throughout the organization. Xu Shan, self-cultivation and character formation. One of the fundamental characteristics of Confucian ethics is Xu Shan, the disciplined cultivation of one's mind, character, and behavior. Whereas many ethical systems emphasize external rules to follow, Confucianism assigns individuals responsibility for self-reflection, learning, and moral development. Several scholars describe this process as involving personal and community efforts, especially self-cultivation, thereby combining individual responsibility and communal support. This has important implications for safeguarding because ethically formed individuals are essential to ethically functioning organizations. In discussing self-cultivation, a scholar explains that Mencius understood Cheng as an inner moral virtue and as a concept connected to metaphysical principles expressed through the way of heaven and in the way of human beings. Rosemont and Ames similarly argue that Confucian traditions seek continuous moral improvement and responsible relationships that can inspire people to become better person every day. Self-cultivation, therefore, supports a proactive rather than merely reactive approach to abuse and the victims. Safeguarding should not only prevent misconduct through procedures, but also strengthen the virtues and the responsibilities of individuals. A scholar characterizes moral cultivation as a dynamic process of spiritual development. Likewise, safeguarding requires continuous development as new challenges emerge within changing social contexts. The Confucian understanding of lifelong moral formation can therefore help to sustain safeguarding cultures capable of responding constructively to evolving risks and responsibilities everywhere in the world. Finally, Jing, reverence and respect. According to a scholar, Jing generally refers either to outward conduct characterized by caution and respect, or to a reverent state of mind. It may be understood as the central axis of self-cultivation because it gathers and focuses the mind, enabling individuals to govern themselves and respond appropriately to different situations. In Juhi's thought, reverential self-restraint and moral cultivation are complemented by the investigation of principle as a foundation for moral education. From a safeguarding perspective, Jing can encourage us constant awareness of the dignity, moral worth, and the vulnerability of every person. They locate Confucian moral responsibility within lived relationships and everyday interactions. Jing therefore supports safeguarding by promoting attentive, prudent, and respectful concern for the welfare of others. Together, these four Confucian concepts connect inner character with outward conduct. A good society cannot be sustained by laws and procedures alone. It also requires persons who have learned to care, act appropriately, examine themselves, and treat others with respect. These concepts thus provide a valuable framework for reflecting on leadership, organizational culture, responsibility, and the protection of human dignity. Confucianism has developed through changing social, political, and religious environments. A scholar highlights the enduring ideal of harmony of heaven, earth, and humanity, and the integrative character of Chinese ethical traditions, which seek balance across multiple dimensions. This broad vision helps to explain the continuing relevance of Confucian thought to contemporary ethics, social responsibility, good governance, and safeguarding of relational cultures. The historical adaptability of Confucianism also contributes to its relevance today. A scholar describes religious and ethical traditions as the practice of structuring values, through which societies form shared understandings of social order and moral conduct. Such value formation is important for safeguarding because it depends on common assumptions concerning honor, responsibility, and appropriate behavior. Miller shows how classical values interact with contemporary social realities. This capacity for adaptation is especially significant for safeguarding, which requires ethical frameworks are able to respond to changing conditions. Confucianism, therefore, can offer both historical depth and contemporary relevance as a resource for safeguarding theory and practice. Now I move to the second part. SWOT analysis, as you know, identifies internal strengths and weaknesses alongside external opportunities and threats to guide strategic decisions and organizational planning effectively. A SWOT analysis provides a structured approach to understanding the internal and external factors influencing the application of a Confucian framework in safeguarding. Strength. One of the principal strengths of a Confucian approach to safeguarding is its understanding of human beings as ethical and relational persons. Ethical identity is formed through social relationships and fulfillment of social responsibilities. This perspective is particularly relevant because abuse, neglect, and exploitation occur within relationships. Confucian ethics, therefore, provides a framework for evaluating the quality of interpersonal relationships and the duties that people owe one another. A relational understanding of persons also presents ethical responsibility not only in terms of individual rights, but as obligations arising from mutual relationships. This strengthens safeguarding by encouraging communities and organizations to recognize vulnerability and accept that protection is not solely the responsibility of designated professionals. Safeguarding becomes a shared community responsibility rather than merely an administrative function. Compassion is another important contribution of Confucian moral thought. Safeguarding depends on the ability to recognize forms of harm that may remain outside the formal procedures. Ethical sensitivity may provide the first indication that support, intervention, care, and protection are needed. A compassionate culture, therefore, provides strong foundation for effective safeguarding practice. Confucian thought also emphasizes the cultivation of the heart and mind as the basis of ethical conduct. This moves safeguarding beyond external regulation and integrates it into moral formation and personal development. The principle of lifelong self-cultivation encourages individuals to reflect continuously on their behavior, attitudes, duties, and responsibilities. It also promotes humility by recognizing that moral development is never complete in our lives. The Confucian emphasis on family relationships may further support safeguarding. Ethical formation begins with close relationships before extending to the wider community and the society. Families can therefore be encouraged to foster respectful relationships, emotional support, and discipline, self-discipline. They may serve as safeguarding partners by helping to prevent harm, intervene when risks arise, and support vulnerable persons in the family alongside the organizations. A scholar describes Confucianism as culturally rather than religiously based. Values such as responsibility, respect, self-discipline, and care may consequently strengthen safeguarding across diverse organizational and international contexts. Safeguarding should not eliminate ordinary expressions of care, such as assisting a child who has fallen, but should guide such actions responsibly. Finally, Confucian ethics is compatible with contemporary safeguarding commitments to human dignity. Zoller and Baer argue that safeguarding ultimately seeks to defend human dignity and integrity within social and institutional context. Confucian ethics contributes especially to the relational dimension of safeguarding, which modern ethical frameworks reinforce dignity, protection, accountability, and human flourishing. Weaknesses. Several limitations of Confucian safeguarding frameworks must be carefully examined. Confucian self-cultivation does not inherently restrict moral development to men. Yet many historical interpretations were patriarchal and limited women's social status and public participation. Safeguarding frameworks informed by Confucianism must therefore include women's perspectives, experiences, and equal participation. Confucian ethics emphasizes character, moral development, care, responsibility, and relational harmony. However, it offers limited guidance concerning trauma, victimization, recovery, and survivor rehabilitation. Confucian approaches should therefore be supplemented by contemporary professional and practice-based frameworks that address victims' psychological, pastoral, legal, spiritual, and social needs. Confucian ethics begins with the moral cultivation of the individual, then extends to the family, community, and wider society. Yet, large-scale safeguarding failures often involve organizational culture, reporting systems, governance, and institutional accountability. Such problems cannot be resolved through individual moral improvement alone. Other ethical and professional frameworks may therefore be better equipped to address urgent systematic failures through institutional regulation and oversight. A further difficulty arises when harmony is prioritized over open confrontation, wrongdoing. Social pressures may encourage individuals to remain within accepted social boundaries and avoid challenging authority. When protecting relationships becomes more important than disclosing harm, vulnerable persons may remain unprotected. Safeguarding practitioners, therefore, balance relational harmony with transparency, reporting, and accountability. Finally, some Confucian concepts may appear difficult to apply to contemporary safeguarding issues involving law, professional practice, complex organizations, and the changing hierarchical structures. Modern institutions require detailed policies, procedures that philosophical traditions alone cannot provide. However, this does not diminish the contribution of Confucian ethics, but it demonstrates the need to integrate moral philosophy with the legal, institutional, and professional safeguarding frameworks. Opportunities. When considering the influence of the Confucian worldview on safeguarding in intercultural contexts, several opportunities also can be detected. Confucian traditions continue to shape East Asian understandings of governance, authority, and social organization. Safeguarding mechanisms may therefore gain greater legitimacy and practical acceptance when they are culturally informed rather than based mainly on external derived frameworks. Another important opportunity is the integration of safeguarding with family-centered care and support. Many modern frameworks focus primarily on institutional responsibilities, whereas Confucian traditions recognize the family as a foundation of moral formation and social welfare. Safeguarding systems could therefore engage families as partners in prevention, oversight, and healing and support rather than treating them only as external stakeholders. Safeguarding may also be integrated into moral education and ethical formation. Confucian traditions emphasize lifelong attentiveness, character development, and self-reflection. These values align with proactive safeguarding, which seeks to prevent harmful behavior before it develops into serious abuse. They can complement formal procedures by addressing the moral attitudes that shape conduct. Safeguarding is more effective when ethical awareness is embedded in organization culture rather than confined to compliance training. Scholars propose a culturally adaptive mental health rights protection framework that balances global rights with the local cultural contexts. This reflects the challenge of applying universal safeguarding principles with sufficient cultural flexibility. Culture should not weaken professional standards, but it can inform approaches to trust, communication, engagement, and implementation. Confucian perspectives also encourage dialogue between Western safeguarding models and non-Western ethical traditions. Since contemporary safeguarding operates across cultural, racial, and religious differences, such dialogue is very much essential. By emphasizing social responsibility, ethical formation, and communal welfare, Confucian thought can contribute to more inclusive, reflective, and effective safeguarding framework. Finally, threats. There are several external threats that may hinder safeguarding through a Confucian perspective and lens. Cultural attitudes toward unequal distribution of power influence how individuals behave and communicate both within and outside organizations. High levels of deference may encourage authoritarian behavior and reduce independent judgment. In safeguarding, this may discourage people from reporting concerns involving senior organizational figures or influential community members. Organizational hierarchy can therefore become a barrier to transparency and accountability. Safeguarding is particularly compromised when respect becomes blind obedience. Individuals may hesitate to question authority because they fear social censure, damaged relationships, or being regarded as disloyal to the community. Effective safeguarding, therefore, depends on systems that protect those who report wrongdoing, especially when the alleged perpetrator holds significant power in the context. Without such protection, abuse may continue for long periods. Another threat is the culture of face-saving in East Asia. In relational societies, preserving personal and collective reputation is very highly appreciated and valued. This can create the pressure to conceal, minimize, or dismiss safeguarding concerns, placing the reputation of a family, community, or organization above the needs of vulnerable victims. A related threat is underreporting. The desire to preserve harmony and social cohesion may suppress emotional expression and discourage help-seeking. Victims, particularly those experiencing domestic abuse, may fear disrupting the family or community or creating social conflicts. Safeguarding systems must therefore encourage disclosure and provide meaningful protection for those who report harm. Safeguarding often requires difficult conversations that may temporarily disrupt group relationships. When institutions prioritize superficial harmony, their ability to protect the people from preventable harm must be weakened. A discerned balance is therefore needed between respect for relational harmony and the willingness to confront harmful conduct that places individuals at unnecessary risk. The final part, the third part, is about intercultural communication mechanisms for safeguarding. Because safeguarding cannot rely on one-size-fits-all universal mechanism, several challenges arise. First, risks differ according to cultural, institutional, and personal contexts. So a uniform policy may overlook specific vulnerabilities. When safeguarding is reduced to rules, forms, and compliance procedures, it may lose sight of its deeper purpose, that is, the prevention of harm, the restoration of the dignity, and the creation of safe relationships. Moreover, universal approaches may not always account for power dynamics, local customs, or unequal access to reporting systems. Therefore, safeguarding requires both clear, shared principles and careful attention to concrete local situations. It must combine universal responsibility with contextual sensitivity, institutional accountability, and pastoral care for the victims. Despite this difficulty, some universal aspects of safeguarding can be considered. First, culturally sensitive safeguarding. The most successful safeguarding initiative might be those that recognize the differing cultural perceptions and assumptions that relate to vulnerability and that ultimately impact communication and decision-making procedures. Programs developed in one social context may face challenges if implemented in communities with differing ethical and relational contexts. Safeguarding professionals then need to recognize how the concepts of responsibility and family and the attitude towards safeguarding impact the thinking around protective measures. Being culturally aware does not mean that safeguarding principles are compromised, not at all, but rather that the safeguarding communication strategies and measures are modified to embrace and uphold those safeguarding principles relevant in local context. In a Confucian context, families and social networks are typically part of decision-making process. It should be also acknowledged that the patient's autonomy should always take precedence, highlighting the need to balance social networks with individual rights. At the same time, safeguarding the well-being and the social relationships of the client when they bring a positive contribution is also crucial. In this context, safeguarding the well-being of the victim may require a higher level of social sensitivity and safeguarding victim dignity and autonomy. Again, according to Zoller and Baer, trust, responsibility, and active concern must shape every environment created by safeguarding. For this reason, safeguarding practitioners are expected to undergo intercultural training to help them to recognize cultural differences while holding firm to universally consistent ethical standards. These two polars must go together rather than sacrificing one another. Second, would you allow me about 3 or 4 minutes more? No? Even though you say no, I will go ahead. Number 2, contextual reporting and support systems. If reporting systems are to function effectively, they must be designed with sensitivity to the local conditions. Social expectations of deference to authority, reputation, and interpersonal harmony influence individuals' decisions regarding the reporting of concerns. Scholars illustrate that cultural standards affect the decision to report and the readiness to describe one's own vulnerability. Contextual safeguarding systems must allow multiple ways to report concerns. Depending on the social and cultural context, individuals may prefer different ways to communicate. Safeguarding systems must be flexible and responsive to varying communication methods in order to maximize the likelihood that individuals will seek help before the situation worsens. Flexible but careful safeguarding systems provide accessibility to diverse and multiple safeguarding structures. Third, universal principles with local adaptations. Successful long-term safeguarding requires commitment to global ethics while adapting safeguarding measures to local contexts. There should be no differences in safeguarding measures vis-à-vis dignity, protection, accountability, and the respect of persons. Similarly, safeguarding should prioritize the welfare of the victims and not the situation. Using the recommendations of Zoller, the focus should be on simplicity of language and methodology, not the sacrifice of fundamental ethics. Safeguarding, therefore, is a mix of universal and culturally attuned ethics. Safeguarding, therefore, is a mix of universal where ethical flexibility and cultural sensitivity are thought of as competing priorities, a safeguarding policy that protects both the ethics and serves the situation best can be the result of the most optimized safeguarding practices in a global context. Effective safeguarding requires the integration of moral principle, cultural understanding, and the responsible practices. Protection, accountability, transparency, and respect are not culturally optional. They provide ethical standards by which institutions, relationships, and procedures must be judged. At the same time, a framework that ignores cultural realities may remain formally correct but ineffective. Contextual adaptation, therefore, strengthens rather than weakens ethical standards. In conclusion, from the Confucian perspective, safeguarding must be understood not merely as administrative compliance, but as a moral and relational commitment to human dignity, protection, and flourishing. Policies, procedures, and accountability structures remain essential, yet they become effective only when they are supported by ethical character, responsible relationships, and culture willing to recognize vulnerability and confront abuse. Confucian philosophy offers valuable resources for this task through its emphasis on humaneness, appropriate conduct, self-cultivation, and reverent attentiveness and social responsibility. Its fundamental concepts can strengthen safeguarding by connecting external standards with inner moral formation. At the same time, they must be approached critically. Harmony must not become silence. Respect must not become blind obedience. And loyalty to family or organization must never take priority over victims and survivors. The central challenge is therefore not to choose between universal principles and the cultural sensitivity, but to bring them into responsible dialogue. Universal commitments to dignity, justice, protection, and accountability must remain firm, while their practical implementation should be attentive to cultural, local context, patterns of authority, and forms of relationship. When these demands are integrated, safeguarding, I hope, will become not only an institutional obligation, but a common human responsibility across cultural and religious contexts. As you continue to, through this conference, discuss this matter of the safeguarding, may I invite you to carry these two questions so that you can reflect upon them individually. Probably you can carry them back to your own countries so that in your own community, in local context, you can discuss these two questions. I hope these questions may help us to examine not only what our policies require, but also what kind of relationships and institutional cultures we are creating for those who are most vulnerable, for them we are serving. Thank you for listening and the patience. I have to pay the fine for you.
Thank you very much, Father Benedict, for unfolding in front of us here the Confucian philosophy and also the values and how that impacts also our thinking, talking, and practice on safeguarding, either in the positive way or how it also can hinder, and that we need also intercultural training and communication in this area to become sensitive to cultural realities. Thank you so much. Okay, now the floor is open to ask questions here to Father Benedict. Just take your seats, and then when you're ready, we can start. Father Benedict, beyond compliance, Confucian self-cultivation and safeguarding in intercultural contexts. And the mics will come. I see one hand up there. Do we have someone going with the mic? The mic, please. Okay. And please be short and say your name and where you are from. Thank you.
I'm Rachel Zhu. I'm a licensure student, first year. I really appreciate Father Jung's presentation. Remind us the sensitivity, cultural sensitivity. When you mentioned that the when you mentioned that the rural compliance is not enough, the Confucian culture ethics, and also those like benevolence, the self-cultive and the care will be a good supplement to the rural compliance. However, from the Confucian culture tradition, I feel that for us, the rural compliance is the biggest challenge. So when the people from maybe you live in the Western context, you emphasize this culture, this kind of inner moral, the cultive will be a good part to make the compliance, to supplement to the compliance of the principle. But for us, we need the rule, we need this kind of requirement of the compliance. And so this is a big challenge. When I sit here, listen to your lecture, I feel, it's too ideal. And this kind of a culture created lots of moralist hypocritics. And also, it became a really, I think anyway, so I really want to listen what's of course, the sensitivity, cultural sensitivity is a good part. Maybe a good for the Westerner, but not for the local people. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Sorry, may we ask again, because we didn't get the question exactly. Could you please precisely formulate your question?
Thank you. I think when people sit together, and then we can start.
My question is that how to keep the balance from the culture, the East Asia Confucian circle. I feel that the lure of the requirement of to do the safeguarding, the lure compliance is so important. But when you emphasize the cultural sensitivity, this kind of Confucian moral will be a good supplement. I think it's too ideal to the local people. That's my question.
Okay. This inner attitude
It's
seems to be too much.
Yeah.
That is what I understand.
Thanks for the challenge. Well, if I understand your question or challenge in this way, I said I emphasize the contribution of the Confucianism is actually more, let's say, individualistic self-development and moral development, something like that. And she said that is too ideal because I don't know where I'm from.
Madam, may we ask you where you're from?
Mainland China. Okay. Yeah. But I did not want to emphasize that, as I said during my comment or talk, I mean, we have two polars, okay? Two pillars, I have to say. That means we have to stick to the universal ethical principles, which is like the human dignity, accountability, and care for others, especially for the victims whatsoever. But at the same time, we have, in order to apply, in order to use that kind of the universal philosophical ethical principles, we have to be locally sensitive to how to utilize, how to implement those universal ethical principles. I did not say that we have to get rid of this universal thing, right? Which means, I think we need two things. We need law, we need rules, we need some norms, because laws and norms and rules make some kind of stability or structure. Without it, I think our own way of self-development or some kind of spirituality, something like that, does not have any reference point. So therefore, I would say that we have to stick to our fundamental, universal, philosophical, ethical principles. We should keep them. At the same time, we have to keep the advantages of the law, rules, and the structure. Without them, I think we don't have any specific direction. We don't have a specific structure with which we can build this safeguarding structure. However, what I felt that we were probably too much focusing on structures. Therefore, we do lose sight of our human and individual contribution to this safeguarding thing. That's what I wanted to say, okay? So I really I did not want to say we get rid of these rules and norms. No, definitely not. There should be, but however, how to utilize, how to make most of these already established universal ethical norms and structure where we have to, let's say, we do not replace them with our individual human development. We have, as you said, we have to complement those two aspects. That's what I wanted to say. Is it okay, my answer?
Thank you very much, Father Benedict. I see here a hand.
Thank you. I think that was very powerful talk on Confucianism and how it links into safeguarding, how you linked the two, that very ancient mystical tradition powerfully impacting our modern safeguarding issues. Over the last 40 years involved with safeguarding, we have, as you have pointed out, policies and ticking boxes has been characteristic. Many, many clerics and priests got frightened of the process, and there was a great unease about it, and consequently both survivors and those who were abused and the church itself, everybody suffered from not getting that balance proper. But when I listen to you, one of the strongest impressions I have is, as Catholics, as people following Christ, the embodiment of Christian New Testament values in what you talked about was shining out of it. What we in our small Carmelite Centre for Spirituality in Oxford, Father Zellner's shifted safeguarding from that kind of doctrinaire approach and very policing report. He brought spirituality into it. And that's why we're here. We believe that the mystical tradition of the Catholic Church brings with it the basic outlook from which all formation and all safeguarding should take place. Psychosexual development in the seminaries we talked about earlier is an outstanding contribution to seminary life, and I've worked in formation for 40 years. But what's lacking, and we need to really embody it as Catholics here, is prayer. Mm-hmm. Prayer is the place in which we need to move it out of its conditioned background in formalities, lack of true discipleship. I think there needs to be some serious studies on placing prayer and the mystical tradition at the center of safeguarding. Mm-hmm. Because that will bring into our safeguarding the manner in which we approach our personal lives, embodying the values of Confucius that you talked about, is exactly what Christ does for us. Mm-hmm. And therefore, spirituality has to be accompanied with, alongside the formative model of Confucius we've talked about. Mm-hmm. But my principal reason for being here is that I believe that if seminary life, formation of priests, formation of all the laity and baptized, if we don't take it out of its judgmental place, if prayer isn't a place of recovering who we are, mm-hmm. if it isn't a place of freedom and transparency, mm-hmm. and prayer sometimes becomes sanctimonious and judgmental, and safeguarding can be a method of bringing us into a new formative model, specifically unashamedly prayerful, based on our serious Christian traditions, and that as part of safeguarding. That will be a very powerful way for us forward. And that's why I'm here, and that's what we offer in our own small spirituality centre. We try to bring into Carmelite spirituality, applying Carmelite spirituality. Mm-hmm. That's the whole purpose of it. But thank you for that contribution, and I would like to see it reflecting also our New Testament values.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for your contribution and comments. I don't know.
Yeah, it's this shift from, let's say, observance of the law to an interior felt responsibility, that what we want, and which is not so easy.
I think I found it quite interesting, Father, because, I have been hearing about the safeguarding so often, so many years. And then we had some kind of some kind of program through which we have to equip ourselves what is the fundamental thing that the safeguarding is trying to say? Basically, I mean, we have to protect the human beings, which is the fundamental loving part of God, right? So therefore, I think what you said that, if I'm not mistaken, safeguarding is one thing. However, if we intermingle or integrate safeguarding into our prayer life, our spirituality, actually we can find some hidden parts that we don't see at the moment in the safeguarding. But if we enter into prayer life and spiritual life, or if we bring those two lenses into understanding or interpreting and implementing safeguarding, probably we can find a new world. Thanks for the comment.
Thank you. Okay, the floor is open for
Hello.
another question. I see
Hello.
here
Josie
one
Stuchley
and then
speaking.
two.
Josie Stuchley speaking. I have a question. So thank you for the speech because it was eye-opening and it was a very nice introduction to the Confucianism. My question would be how to relate this ethical life developed socially through responsibility, concern, and complete goodness to Mr. Freud and his superego. Because is this somehow another demand from society that I should, which is kind of supporting and making bigger the superego, or is there somehow connection with a person? Because as you describe it, I think it's very useful for our society to understand the relational aspect of society, but how does it relate to the superego? Is it a superego demands, or is it coming from self and from the relationship with other? That would be my question. Thank you.
Well, Father, first of all, I'm not familiar with this phrase superego. Therefore, I'm sorry to say I cannot answer your question immediately. However, can you rephrase, rather than using superego, can you use a different language so that I can understand the question? Sorry about that.
Okay, so basically superego is defined as demands from society, and that I should do, what I should do, basically. And the question is, and it's from, these are demands from outside, not from myself. And in Christianity, the motivation is not the outside demands, but my internal relationship with personal Son of God. So, and now, I think as it was presented, it's really nice and deep tradition, which is showing that society should be stronger, present in my ego. But is this demands, moral demands, and other demands which are coming from outside, or how should I make it my own?
Okay.
Thank you.
So your question is that situated in a certain context and society, the society gives us some expectation on our behavior, on our actions whatsoever. However, I have my own personal motivation or idea of what to do. So there must be some kind of clash, right? So your question might be, what can I do with this clash or this discrepancies between the two? Am I right? Yeah. More or less. Okay, thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you. So we go here to the next question.
No,
that
no.
was.
Can I answer? Yes. Okay. Sorry.
It's okay. We are not fighting.
Sister Miriam is in a hurry because she must be very hungry.
He's still answering the phone.
Don't worry. The plate is full. Well, I don't know whether I can answer more properly. However, again, this is a kind of our human dichotomy, which means there is a social expectation and also cultural expectation and also my own expectation, hope. But at the same time, actually my hope, my expectation is formed by superego or social expectation. But my question is that how can I judge? How can I judge whether this social expectation or superego is very much acceptable in this specific context? Because when we go into one culture, the cultural norms and rules, we are formed by it, we are baptized by them. But that does not mean that I have to comply with those social norms. Therefore, I think we have to bring in two dimensions in our decision making, I hope. Whether I have to accept it so that I don't have any disparity between the social norms and my own experience. First of all, we should have very much a different eyes, different lens to look through these social norms. Probably in our safeguarding social norms, the social norms definitely do not really comply with our own safeguarding individual, probably, social norms. So therefore, first of all, I think this might be what Jesus said, our conversion experience. Conversion experience not necessarily means we have to be morally correct, as you know, but for me, we have to bring in a new different dimension, which means we should have a different eyes, different mind, or different courage to look at those reality that has to be stayed for a long, long centuries. But now situations are changing, so how can we have a different lens, different eyes? We should have courage, I believe. Second dimension is, I would say, we should have a more discerning mind and hearts. Discernment is not just to choose good and bad. No, I don't think so. Discernment is attune our minds and heart to the will of God. That's it. Therefore, discernment does not necessarily mean that we feel comfortable always. No. Most probably, the will of God is different from that of ours, right? That makes us uncomfortable. Therefore, I think if we know the, let's say, movement of the Spirit that leads us to the will of God, I think we can have the discerning heart and mind so that even though there is the social norms or superego, we can have a courage, hold on, let's talk, stop it. And then if we have some kind of disagreement, but however, we can continue to discuss so that we can work together. I think that might be the kind of general attitude we should build up. That's what I want to say.
Thank you, Father Benedict, for the further explanation. Okay, we take the last question that was here.
Thank you. My name is Mar Muñoz Visoso. I worked in the United States. And my expertise is not so much in safeguarding, it's more in intercultural competence in ministry, promoting intercultural competence. And I have kind of a double question for Father Benedict, because my question would be for you, how would you recommend that churches in Western societies, pastors, bishops, learn more about the approach of culturally sensitive approaches to safeguarding or ministry? Because I have found often that it is difficult for even bishops sometimes to understand that culturally sensitive pastoral care takes from speaking and working with the people in the language they can understand, with the values that they have been brought up. And they bring those with them to countries like the United States. But often we find a little bit of rejection for a mix of, it's kind of the wrong theology, it's kind of the wrong approach. And we're so used to look at things from the Western mentality and not value, traditional Eastern values, and cultures. And so that's one. But the other one is, how can we, in that particular context of communities that have come from more communitarian dimensions and perhaps with some Confucian or Muslim, backgrounds, and that operate in a westernized society, how can we work with them in a way that we also help them value what they bring with them, and that they have, as you explained, some of the tools within their own cultural background to work in areas like safeguarding. And I want to say that I really appreciated your presentation, particularly your SWOT analysis, because I think it's not naive, it's not presenting an ideal, but it's actually coming at it, from the strength, but also the weaknesses that we need to keep in mind. So thank you very much for your presentation.
Thanks for the question. I will answer two questions probably at the same time. I wanted to compartmentalize my answers in two parts. Okay. First of all, to encounter with something new is painful one, because as human beings, we have a tendency to keep the status quo, correct? Yeah. Nobody would like to change. Yeah? Nobody would like to change. However, if the change, or let's say for the betterment of the society, if the change is inevitable, I think first step should be to know where we are situated in this context. So that means we have to know, first of all, who we are, what would be my fears, what would be my hopes in this specific change movement. So I think that is the most important thing, I believe, whereby we should know what are the, let's say, kind of SWOT analysis of your own context to do something. When you do the strategic management, the strategic planning in any organization, very much the first stage is what? To know where you are. I think that is very important. Therefore, East Asian philosophical context, today you are more or less hypnotized probably by talk, because it's something new probably. But however, if you really take a look at your own context now, you will feel what are the missing gaps? What are the areas to improve? So therefore, I would like to emphasize, in the first stage, we have to know where we are, your situation, who you are, who the bishops are, what are the bishops' fear or hope, something like that. Second thing is that I wanted to say, I wanted to take a look at our inner dispositions. First of all, how do we accept uncertainty? How do we accept uncertainty? Because change inevitably means what? Uncertainty. Many people misunderstand that when you do the change management or discernment, people wrongfully believe that discernment makes us have the clearer view, clearer vision, clearer options. Not necessarily. Discernment is what? The courage to accept the uncertainty. We are moving into uncertain arena, uncertain desert. Because, like today's gospel, the message of God or the presence of God is not easily detected. Therefore, what? We should go to our small room. To go to our small room is actually what? Specific action to encounter God honestly, right? So first of all, I think the first, disposition means, for me, is the willingness to take or willingness to go into uncertain arena, uncertain desert. Second thing is that, as you rightly mentioned, I think openness is quite important, openness. We do not know this Chinese or East Asian, Confucian, the philosophical thoughts might be helpful to your situation or not, okay? Therefore, unless we don't have any openness to play with them in our own life, we do not know. Those Confucian concepts or anything new should not be implanted by somebody else. You are the implanters. You must be the implanters who knows the context or the face of the soils and the shape of the shovels, for instance. How long is that plant whatsoever? So I think this openness to the something new is also very important inner disposition. Please tell your bishops, for instance, or we should challenge ourselves whether we have this inner position also. The final is that I think one MIT business administration professor emphasized the learning organization. We belong to any organization, but as I said in the beginning, we are more or less having some tendency to stick to what is comfortable, what is familiar. But learning organization means what? We are working together, trying to find out something new, something useful for the organization. In this case, we are working together. Probably this is what Pope Francis says, a synodal way, synodal church. Bishop is not the only one who have to decide, right? Everybody, which means the stakeholders in an organization, possibly or hopefully should participate in this discussion of change or in this discussion of implanting something new in our organization. Probably I can leave this discussion of inner disposition to you, you might add something or you might replace what I have said, those 3 points, based upon your own experience or your own context. So I believe this learning experience or learning organization is very much challenging, but I believe in the end it is very worthwhile pursuing this endeavor to become a learning organization. That's what I want to say.
So thank you very much, Father Benedict, for this very inspiring and challenging input.
I want to go.
Okay.
I was very afraid.
No.
I should be grilled to death, but so far I'm surviving.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. And so we are trying to become also here a learning organization, how to adapt our safeguarding policies in the best possible way. Okay, thank you very much, Father Benedict. It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much.